Hi church, I'm excited today because today we are starting a new series called Don't. Yes, don't with regards to fear, worry, and doubt. So come, let's jump right away with the first one, and that is fear. I'd like you to imagine with me for a while. Imagine with me, what if I got a special permit from the medical authorities and I ask you to go inside the ICU or the isolation area of people infected with COVID-19 to do a kind of a short video for my sermon illustration. And as you prepare to go in, the medical authority informs you that all of a sudden they ran out of all the protection gears. You know, the mask and the suit and all those. And if you still go in without them, it is a 99.9 chance that you get infected as well. And as you are considering the implications of that, I come and see you standing outside and I say, hey, how come you are still standing outside? How come you are not inside? And then you tell me like, oh, because we don't have all these things. And then I say, but what is there to be afraid of? There is not, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Come on, fear not. Everything's going to be all right. Yeah, of course you may be infected with COVID-19, but come on, that's about it. So don't be afraid. Fear not, okay? 加油. Come on, let's go in. Yes, of course. I am crazy. I am not thinking to say that. I'm being unrealistic to say, to fear not when there was something to be afraid of, right? But did you know that Jesus said something like that to his disciples as well? Let me show you. This is what he said. Jesus said to his disciples, I am sending you like sheep among wolves. And you will be handed over to the local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. You will be hated by everyone because of me. And when you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. And then after Jesus said all these things, it's like in essence, Jesus was basically saying that, if you do what I'm telling you to do, you will probably be in danger, you will be in big trouble, and you will not be able to get out of the trouble. You may even be put to death. And this is my word of encouragement. And this is what Jesus said. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Now, I don't know about you, but I'll retort to Jesus. Don't be afraid. Really, Jesus? I think you have no idea of what you have just said to us. I mean, in the midst of 99.9% of non-survival, don't be afraid. Really? Is that even possible? Right? But you see, we must understand that fear was actually one thing that Jesus really took his effort to teach his disciples. Because on several occasions, Jesus taught his disciples not to fear, not to fear, not to fear. For example, on one occasion, Jesus and his disciples took a boat ride to cross over to the other side. And Matthew, who was there, records for us what happened. As they were on their way, Matthew says, suddenly, there was a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. Take note of this word furious, because it was not any storm, but it was a furious storm. Now, we may not know the intensity, we may not know how it feels like, or how it feels like to experience a furious storm or riding on a boat. But think about your own experiences, right? Think about those life-threatening, frightening experiences in your life, where those moments where you felt that your heart really stopped beating for a while. You know what I mean? And one of those moments in my life was when I was hit by a truck in the year 2018. And this was what did to my car, when the truck hit. This is the picture, yes. I tell you, this was one of the most frightening moments in my life. Because when I was hit, on my right-hand side where I was seated. And then when it hit from my right-hand side, what happened was that my car really went one big circle, just rotated, one big circle, while the car was still moving forward and while the truck was behind me. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to die today. And even if I don't die today, I will probably be badly injured and hospitalized, and I will never get back to normal life. It was terrifying. It was frightening. And really, I tell you, my heart really stopped for a while. And I think that's kind of the experience that the disciples of Jesus were experiencing on the boat. And in the midst of such frightening situation, Matthew tells us what Jesus was doing. This was what Jesus was doing. Jesus was what? Sleeping. But Jesus was sleeping. Now, how could Jesus be sleeping, right, when his disciples needed him the most? I mean, Jesus knew it, right? Jesus would know it, right? So how could he be just silent and sleeping and letting them go through terrifying and frightening moments and endangering their lives? And perhaps this is what some of us have experienced as well, right? Let me ask you, was there any storm in your life where you found Jesus to be sleeping? You cried out to God to rescue you from those situations in your lives, in your relationships, in your work, in your families, in your health. But what you received was just silence. And it seems to you that Jesus was really sleeping. There was no answer. There were no justice. There were no deliverance. There were no solution to your problems. In fact, you went through the problems and you had a tough time. Even worse, for some of you, this is the very reason why you left the church. This is the very reason why you left the faith and you decided to unfollow Jesus. If so, if that is the case for you, whoever you are, my brother, my sister, my friend, I want to invite you back, because I think and I believe you may have left faith unnecessarily. Don't leave. Come back. Because it may look like Jesus is sleeping, but well, you never know. He may be just pretending to sleep, right? I mean, well, even if he is sleeping, he does it so as to test your faith in him, like he does with everyone, like he did with his disciples on the boat. So, here's an encouragement. That's an encouragement. So I hope you will consider, you will reconsider coming back. I hope you will take into a serious consideration to stay put in your faith in Jesus. He may be sleeping sometimes, but he is always with you and with me. So now as a result of the furious storm and seeing Jesus asleep, Matthew tells us that the disciples went and woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us. We are going to drown." Jesus replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Why are you so afraid? Jesus is asking, come on guys, what happened? What's wrong? Why are you afraid? Maybe Jesus didn't hear what they said, or maybe Jesus wasn't aware of the furious storm that he was in. Of course they will be afraid. They will be afraid. Of course you will be afraid. I will be afraid. I mean, you are in the middle of a furious storm. Your boat is almost sinking and you are going to drown at any time. You will be afraid. But you see, Jesus was very disappointed with his disciples. Disappointed. Why? Because they were afraid. Well, yes, they may have, there was a valid reason for the disciples to fear. But you see, as I said earlier, Jesus was really on a mission to teach his disciples about fear. About what? About fear, not to fear, not to fear. So, after this so-called failed incident, failed test, there was another occasion where Jesus took the opportunity to teach them again. Or rightly speaking, Jesus created the very occasion to teach his disciples again not to fear. And we find that in Matthew chapter 14. And this incident took place right after Jesus performed the miracle of feeding the 5,000. And this is what Matthew tells us. Immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while Jesus, sent the people home. Jesus insisted, Jesus forced, Jesus compelled the disciples to get back to the same boat as before, into the same lake. But why did he insist them? Well, who would want to take a boat ride with Jesus after that life-threatening, terrifying, and frightening experience, right? I wouldn't, you wouldn't, no one would. Anyways, Jesus managed to do it. Jesus managed to get the disciples get into the boat and this time just by themselves, asking them to go over to the other side of the lake, and then he will be there by himself while Jesus sends the people back home. And so Matthew tells us after Jesus had sent them away, he went by himself up into the hills to pray. It was late and Jesus was there alone. By this time, Matthew tells us, the boat was already far from land. And here begins another drama. Here begins another test. It was hit, referring to the boat. The boat was hit by waves because the wind was blowing against it. Now this time, it wasn't a furious storm. It was a strong wind that was blowing against them. So in other words, they were rowing against the direction of the wind. So they were really having a hard time to move forward to the other side as Jesus commanded them. Now comes the real testing part. Matthew tells us, as they were struggling, as they were rowing their boat, struggling, going against the strong wind, Matthew tells us, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when his disciples saw him walking on the water, they were afraid. There you go again. They are scared again. They are afraid again. Of course they would, right? They said, "It is a ghost," and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Come on, guys, don't be afraid. Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid? Don't be afraid. Now we must understand this, that Jesus wasn't saying that there was nothing to fear about the storms and the waves that they were experiencing. No, Jesus is not being unrealistic here. He knows that the storms and the waves are something to be afraid of, especially when you are on a boat. So then what's his point? What is he teaching? And here's what I believe Jesus is teaching his disciples at that moment, and he is teaching to you and to me today as well. And that is this. Even when there is something or someone to be afraid of, which is probably every time, it's true of every one of us, right? There is always something or someone to be afraid of. And Jesus is basically saying, even when there is something or someone to be afraid of, you don't have to fear. You don't have to fear. You don't have to fear even when there is something or someone to be afraid of. Now, this is so powerful. This is so powerful because Jesus, he knows that their lives, the lives of his disciples are surrounded by so many things that can easily cause them to fear. And such fear has the potential to paralyze and demotivate them from living a life to its fullest. And that's why Jesus was teaching them. That's why Jesus was teaching them on and on that they need not fear. They need not fear. They need not fear even when there is something or someone to be afraid of. And he was inviting them into a new way of living life. But was Jesus successful in doing that? Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. And I guess that's a comforting truth for you and for me, isn't it? Why? Because like many of us, the disciples feared all the way, right? If you read the Gospels in the New Testament, it tells us that the disciples deserted Jesus when he was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane because they were all afraid. None of the disciples spoke for Jesus when he was put on trial because they were terrified. And one of them even denied knowing Jesus because he was so frightened. And listen to this. When Jesus died, all the disciples locked themselves down at homes because they were all scared to death. And you wonder, and I wonder, what has happened to all the teachings of Jesus? What has happened to all the practical examples and teachings of Jesus telling them not to fear, not to fear, not to fear, even when there is something or someone to be afraid of? But all of a sudden, these disciples became fiercely fearless. They became fearless not because Jesus took them for another boat ride. I don't think that would have worked anyway. They became fearless because they saw Jesus die and they saw Jesus rise from the dead. Everything about the disciples changed when they saw a risen Savior. They emerged from being a bunch of fearful disciples to a bunch of fearless change makers who turned the world upside down. And that's why Jesus said to his disciples before, remember these words of Jesus? Jesus said, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but fear the one." Fear only the person, fear only the thing who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Now this is so powerful because you see, the disciples finally understood that Jesus is the one who is actually to be feared with great fear, because He is the only one who is able to destroy both soul and body. And I tell you, at the sight of a risen Jesus, they lost their fear of death, because Jesus overpowered, Jesus defeated and rose from the dead. And that is why, when they lost their fear of death, when the disciples lost their fear of death, they lost their fear of everything else. When the disciples became fearless of death, they became fearless of everything else. In other words, when they feared the one to be feared, they feared no one. They feared no thing, nothing. So here is the fascinating truth we learn from the life of the early disciples of Jesus. And it is this: that when you truly believe that Jesus died for your personal sin, that He was buried, and that He rose from the dead, and that He offers His resurrected life to you as well, and you begin to truly revere and fear Him only, then what seems to be most unrealistic, impractical command of Jesus, don't be afraid, fear not, be fearless, becomes a way of life. It becomes a new way of life. And that became a new way of life when the disciples of Jesus saw Jesus rose from the dead. And this, my friends, is what you and I have been invited to as well. And quite honestly, isn't this that's so needed today with the current global pandemic situation that we are in, right? And Jesus, in the midst of all this, offers to you and to me today a new way of living. This was what Jesus took so much pain and time to teach His disciples. And today He's teaching us. Today Jesus is reminding us to embrace that new way of life. Because if we don't, then all the fears that surround us on a daily basis will be like storms and waves that toss us back and forth and make our life more miserable than it already is. Is that how you want to live? Is that how you want to live? So, church, my friends, what do you fear? What do you fear right now that's making your life even more miserable? What fear is keeping you from moving on in life? What are your storms and waves in the midst of this COVID-19 situation? Is it fear of uncertainty? Fear of insecurity? Is it fear of instability or safety? Is it fear of loss? Fear of death? What? What are your fears right now? What are your fears right now? Because here is what I believe Jesus would say to you and to me. I am with you in your fears. Jesus would say, I am with you in your fears as I was with the early disciples. Jesus would say, I believe to you and to me, I am with you in your storm with the early disciples. And I am watching you in your struggles as I did with the early disciples. And Jesus would say, I am never far away from your fears, storms, and struggles. So, based on that, do not fear. Do not fear even when there is something or someone to be afraid of. There will always be. The fact of life is this: there will always be something or someone to be afraid of. And that's why the faster that you learn to fear not, the better your life will be, isn't it? So, is that not what you want? A better life, to be living with confidence in the midst of all these uncertainties. Is that what you desire to see for your life, especially in this time? Is that how you want to live your life today in the midst of all the uncertainties? But you may ask, is it even possible? And I would say absolutely possible. Absolutely yes. But if and only if we follow the footsteps of the early disciples of Jesus. And that is this: to fear the one to be feared. Fear the one to be feared. And you and I will fear no one. You and I will fear nothing. To fear the one who can destroy both body and soul. The one who is the author of life and death, Jesus Christ. Fear Him and you will fear no more. In other words, church, when you fear the one to be feared, when you fear the one to be feared, you and I will have the courage. You and I will have the courage to fear not. To fear not, even when there is something or someone to be afraid of. And I pray that this will be a reality for you and for me today. This will be a reality for all of us. May the Lord bless you, and may the Lord equip you to be so. Amen.